Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to look right past all those complex equations and intimidating graphs to explore the absolute beating heart of economics. Because at its core, economics really isn't just about money or numbers. It's actually the fascinating real-world study of human choices, the messy behavior behind those choices, and the massive consequences they trigger on a global scale. If you've ever wondered why governments make the specific spending choices they do, or honestly, why we as individuals sometimes buy things we definitely don't need, well, you are in the exact right place. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the economics of choice, micro and macro lenses, how we humans actually make decisions, the great economist debate, real-world government spending, and finally, wrap up with Ireland's economic history. Jumping right into Section 1. The economics of choice and understanding scarcity. Everything precious in life has a cost. It's a heavy thought, right? But this isn't just some deep philosophical statement. It is literally the fundamental problem of economics. We live in this crazy world where human wants are, let's face it, basically unlimited. We always want more. But the resources to satisfy those wants, things like time, labor, raw materials, money, they are strictly scarce. Every single decision we make, from you just buying a cup of coffee to a government building a brand new hospital, it carries a fundamental cost, because choosing one thing always means giving up another. That scarcity, it forces choice. Moving on to Section 2, micro and macro lenses, the city planner analogy. So to really wrap our heads around how we analyze these economic choices, I want you to think of a city planner. A city planner has to look closely at specific individual suburbs, right? They need to make sure the local roads and schools are actually functioning. But then they also have to step way back and look at the entire thriving city to ensure the overall macro infrastructure is healthy. In economics, we divide our study in the exact same way to make sense of the whole shebang. So microeconomics, that's basically our magnifying glass. It focuses on the individual suburbs of the economy, looking closely at how single consumers, individual households, and specific businesses make their decisions. On the flip side, you've got macroeconomics, which zooms way out to view the city as a whole. It deals with big picture stuff: government involvement, inflation, international trade, and overall unemployment. But here is the absolutely crucial connection. Macro developments are entirely driven by millions of tiny, micro decisions. You simply cannot understand the big picture without looking at the individual choices that paint it. Now, when millions of those individual micro decisions scale up, well, that's where you get these massive macroeconomic forces. Take aggregate demand, for example. It represents the total amount of goods and services demanded across the entire economy. It is essentially the sum of every single individual's consumer's choice to buy a good or service at a specific time. When millions of us decide, say, to save our money instead of spending it, aggregate demand drops, and the whole macroeconomic landscape shifts right along with it. All right, Section 3, how humans make decisions, logic versus emotion. So this begs a massive question. Are we just these emotional, totally unpredictable beings? Or are we actually hyper-logical data processors, meticulously weighing the costs and benefits of every single move? This question alone has created a huge split in how economists actually study us. Well, traditional economics leans heavily on rational choice theory. That model basically assumes you and I are perfectly logical, like walking calculators who always maximize our personal benefit based strictly on our budget. But newer fields like behavioral economics look at us and say, wait a minute, humans are wonderfully flawed. It brings psychology into the mix, acknowledging that, hey, we get emotional, we have biases, and we are frequently completely incapable of making the perfect logical choice. Which brings us to Section 4, the economist's great debate, objectivity versus opinion. I absolutely love this quote from former U.S. President Harry S. Truman. Give me a one-handed economist. All my economists say, on the one hand, on the other. It just perfectly captures the sheer frustration politicians feel when they're dealing with economic advice. Because economics isn't physics, right? You can't just drop an apple and know exactly how fast it's going to fall. Because we are so complex, economists debate competing theories constantly, offering, well, on the one hand, this might work, but on the other hand, it might cause this. To really decode these debates, we kind of have to separate facts from opinions. So economists use positive statements when they're acting like scientists. These are objective, testable facts. For example, the economy shrank by 2.5% last year. You can look at the data and prove that true or false. But Economists also use normative statements when they act like policy advisors. These are value judgments and opinions. If an economist says the government should increase spending to stimulate the economy, that is an opinion about what ought to happen. And you just can't scientifically prove a should. And man, those opinions span a really wide spectrum. Over on one side, you've got Keynesian economists who believe in a much more hands-on approach. They argue that a well-functioning economy actually requires government intervention, things like imposing minimum wages, adjusting interest rates, offering grants. Then on the far right side, we have free market economists who advocate for a totally hands-off, laissez-faire approach. They argue the marketplace is best left to self-regulate without any government bailouts or heavy spending. We aren't here to pick a side today, for sure, but recognizing this spectrum, it's absolutely vital to understanding how different real-world policies are born. Okay, let's ground this in reality with Section 5, Real-World Government Spending, the ultimate choice. To do that, we need to bring back our old friend, scarcity, and talk about opportunity cost. Remember, a government's resources are strictly limited, but the demands placed on them? They're infinite. Therefore, the true costs of choosing to fund, say, a new housing initiative isn't just the millions of euros spent, it's the alternative that was missed out on. The opportunity cost is the loss of the new schools or the healthcare upgrades that exact money could have funded instead. Okay, I want you to literally step into the shoes of the chief economic advisor right now. Imagine it's you. You have limited resources, but you are facing a post-pandemic recovery, the fallout from Brexit, an ongoing housing crisis, inadequate infrastructure, and the urgent ticking clock of climate action. How on earth do you choose? Which fire do you put out first, knowing full well that every choice carries a heavy opportunity cost for another vital sector? Let's actually map that immense pressure out with real numbers. We're looking at a planned 120 billion euro expenditure for 2025. That is a massive pie, but look at the scale of these trade-offs. You've got 26.9 billion going just to social protection, 25.8 billion to health, 8 billion to housing, and almost 15 billion just to service debt and EU payments. Every single time the government pledges to increase spending in, say, transport or the environment, they have to meticulously calculate exactly where those funds are being pulled from. It is an absolute tightrope walk. Think about it. If a government spends too little and creates a budget surplus, critics are going to jump in and say they are using resources inefficiently and missing vital opportunities to fix society's massive problems today. But if they spend too much and run a budget deficit, well, then they're forced to borrow from foreign markets. That adds to the national debt, which literally just means higher taxes and heavier burdens for the public tomorrow. There is no easy answer here, folks. Only highly calculated choices. And finally, Section 6. Ireland's economic history, choices through time. This timeline is just a perfect real-world case study in macroeconomic transformation. Back in the 1930s, the focus was entirely on protectionism and farming, a huge agrarian economy. But watch the pivot in the 1960s. The country opened up, focusing heavily on tech and foreign direct investment. Add in the introduction of free education in 1967 to suddenly create a highly skilled workforce, and you paved the exact runway needed for deep international integration by 1973. It's all connected. And here's something wild. Even during times of massive global crisis, micro-level actions can totally save a macro economy. While the Great Depression was absolutely devastating much of the Western world, Ireland actually managed to emerge relatively unscathed. Why? Well, because of their specific, highly targeted trade of beef and dairy products to the UK. Those daily, micro-level agricultural productions and exports provided a vital lifeline. It literally protected the broader national economy during one of the darkest economic periods in human history. Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen how individual logic and raw emotion drive markets, how economists fiercely debate the rules of the game, and how government budgets shape our daily lives and our history. We know now, for a fact, that everything precious has a cost. So as you look around at the world today, at the challenges and the massive opportunities right in front of us, what economic choices will we make right now, and what historical consequences are we leaving for the generations of tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.